In today's RPJ submission, I'm going to be talking about my journey towards becoming a critically reflective practitioner and bringing up examples from previous reflective practice journals in order to support my statements about this journey. So Larrivee 2008 came up with a tool to assess reflective practice within teachers and broke this down within 4 stages. This is necessary because there is no current agreement on what constitutes reflection, but several authors have proposed their own models. Interestingly, the pre-reflective stage of Larrivee's 2008 model is very similar to Taggart and Wilson's technical stage, which they proposed in their 2005 paper. Interestingly, some authors dispute this stage as to whether or not it actually constitutes reflection, since most of the time it's purely reactive and very much in the moment. And this is something I was definitely conscious of during my first placement, especially when, for example, the activities that I'd planned in light of specific learning objectives weren't working as well as I'd hoped, and it just became a case that I would default to simply coaching another drill or a different activity, and my lessons became more about crowd control, and it was too difficult for me to almost reflect within the context of the lesson I was delivering, and it was more a case of me finding a solution that would resolve the behaviour rather than working out what indeed caused the behaviour in the first place. So this level of reflection is not considered critical reflection by Larrivee, and certainly some other authors don't consider it reflection at all. Moving up one stage towards the surface level of reflection, this is where strategies are starting to be put in place whereby you're attempting to control the outcome, or certainly at least acknowledging the fact that there may be various outcomes dependent on your input. So whilst this stage is one up from the pre-reflective stage that I may have been at previously, it was still very narrow-minded in the sense that I assumed that because I was implementing the same strategy as other teachers, that this would result in the same output or behaviour from the students. Paul Dix talks about the importance of acknowledging that you as the teacher or as the adult are central to the behaviours that you see, in his book titled "When the Adult Changes, Everything Changes." Interestingly, despite the fact that my current placement is in the same trust as my former placement, and the fact that they sing from the same hymn sheet in terms of their behavioural code of ethics, it's interesting to see the differences in, for example, the way that they deliver PE and the way that they assess PE, but I'll get onto more of that later. So whilst I felt like I was delivering the same strategies as other teachers, the reality is how I was delivering these strategies were different. Now, when I was in my pre-reflective stage, or the surface level stage of reflection, I was simply looking at the fact that pupils that I was teaching were behaving differently in my lessons compared to how they behaved in other teachers' lessons, despite the fact that, to my mind's eye, I was using the same strategies, trying to deliver content in the same way. So I took the behaviour differences very personally. However, again, on reflection and having spoken to my mentor at the time, it was clear that I hadn't scaffolded activities appropriately, and that pupils acting up from a behaviour standpoint was simply a combination of pupils not being able to access the learning, and the fact that how I was delivering my behaviour management strategies were different to how other teachers were, despite the fact that the actual strategy per se was the same. So for example, I had one pupil in my year 8 class who sat down during my lesson. I assumed it was because the behaviour management was poor, or that he didn't like my lesson, but the fact was that when I later went on to teach him again, and I'd provided different activities that was more appropriate to his level, I kept him within a group where he could achieve success. All of a sudden the behaviour started to clear up. So again, this was based off the back of conversations I'd had with my mentor, and Brookfield 95 talks about the importance of sharing your struggles between yourself and other teachers, so that one, you don't take the reactions of the students personally, and two, you can identify what exactly it is that teachers are doing differently. Interestingly, on the subject of doing things differently, one big thing that I've started to reflect on is my expectations of students. So for example, with that year 8 class, initially I was thinking, right, this is going to be hard work because I've previously noted behavioural disruptions, versus actually giving myself permission to think, actually, you know what, this is going to be a good lesson. Chang 2011 talks about something called the Pygmalion effect, which simply states that teachers' expectations of a certain class or pupils then go on to inform the way that teachers teach, which then informs obviously the student outcomes, and saying that it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that if teachers are told positive things about a certain group, then that then reflects in the way that teachers end up planning and delivering for certain groups, versus, for example, if a teacher is told that certain groups are probably have behaviours that are difficult to control, they may be less inclined to do certain activities, which then may lead to pupils becoming bored or off task, or simply not engaging with the learning, and as I said, it becomes almost a vicious negative cycle. For me, a big game changer was the special educational needs experience with one of my lectures, and speaking to one of the support staff who said that she believed there was no reason why these pupils couldn't go on to achieve anything that pupils who didn't have their special educational needs could, and that they simply might need the resources presented in a different way, or just a bit of patience. I thought this was a lovely way of looking at things, and it really challenged the way that I plan and deliver lessons in light of the pupils that will be in them. And it made me think about the bigger picture of not just education, but physical education as well. And my thought has gone from thinking that it's important for physical education to help develop physical literacy, which will obviously help pupils later in their life, but to thinking, is it wider than that? Is it that, yes, physical literacy is important, but what does a child need to be healthy? And interestingly, this is something that I'm conflicted with at the moment, in the sense of my previous school, they used what they call the Hearts, Bodies and Minds tracker, whereby they delivered an assessed PE in light of pupils' ability to problem solve, pupils' ability to interact with others, as well as the physical skill that they could demonstrate. Whereas in my current school, there is a heavy emphasis on the technical and tactical side of sport, and therefore assessments and the PE lessons are delivered with that in mind. Now, for me, I personally prefer the Hearts, Bodies and Minds framework, because it allows, or it for me gives a more consistent way of setting those high expectations, explaining why PE is important, especially to kids who, for example, are perhaps not the most sporty, and also allows, for me, a justification for PE to be in the curriculum regardless of whether children enjoy sport or not. And again, as I said, this has made me question where my beliefs come from. Yes, they come from my previous experiences and what I've read in terms of research relating to physical literacy, but I feel like I'm moving more towards the critical end of reflection, as I'm now questioning. I've moved on from saying, is this the right way to teach, for example, an aspect of PE, such as the physical side of kicking a ball in football, versus is this the right thing for kids to be being taught about, versus, as I said, the more holistic approach of, yes, we might be kicking a football, but where does that fit into in the bigger picture of the purpose of education? And for me, it's about creating students who have the opportunity to have choices in their later life, not just from an academic perspective, but they have this social abilities to interact with people from different backgrounds, they have the ability to be led as part of a team, and they have an ability to problem solve. So now the challenge for me moving forward will be, to what extent can I put this belief into practice when it comes to delivering physical educations at my new school, who don't adopt or haven't yet adopted the same means of assessment that my previous school did. And for me, that's the difference between theory and reality. In theory, I think the school should be delivering lessons that are more holistic and allow us to get a greater feel for psychosocial factors, and the reality will be whether or not I'm able to implement this, given that there is a new school setting and that I may be the only teacher delivering it from that sort of means.